Hello and welcome in once again to the most accurate podcast in the entire fantasy football industry. You heard it here and everywhere else. It is Friday morning here at 4 for 4 Football. I am Matt Okada. With me is John Paulson. We are coming off a rip-roaring Thursday night football game featuring the Buccaneers and the Falcons that was, I think, exceeded expectations in every way possible. John, how are you doing on this Friday morning?
I'm doing good. I like Fridays. I like Fridays a lot better than Mondays. I feel like that's a pretty consensus take. But yeah, good game last night, and caught the last quarter and overtime. A lot of fantasy things to talk about from it.
There are. Also, just putting it out there because I feel like he probably doesn't get enough credit. Kirk Cousins is one of the more clutch quarterbacks in the NFL, I'd have to say. He's shown it many times this year. Good for him. He and the Falcons clutched out a 36-30 overtime win. For anyone who missed it, I almost would say go watch it. Don't listen for the next 3 minutes and then go watch it because it was such a fun game. The last play, Drake London got hurt. Kaderil Hodge came in and caught a 45-yard touchdown pass to win the game. It was one of the most insane things I've seen in recent memory. However, before that happened, there was a ton of fantasy fallout. So we'll breeze through it here. Both quarterbacks were great. Somehow Baker Mayfield didn't actually end up throwing for that many yards, just 180, but he threw 3 touchdowns. Meanwhile, Kirk Cousins threw for 509 yards and 4 touchdowns and 1 pick, 42 completions on 58 pass attempts. Before we get to the rest of the interesting names here, I'm just curious, do you think that this was primarily a product of the matchup, just a fluke, or is this something where it took them a while to get the offense fully, functional under Cousins? He's new to it. He's new to the team. He was coming off the injury, and now they're starting to click, and we're going to see more of what we expect, or some people expected optimistically from this offense moving forward.
Well, this is if you look at the box score, 59 pass attempts, 18 rush attempts, and if you see this, you would normally think that, okay, this team was trailing the entire game, which really wasn't the case. It was pretty competitive the entire game. Let's see, 24-17 at halftime, so a 1-score game. You'd maybe think that they couldn't run the ball at all, but Bijan had 5.1 yards per carry, 61 yards on 12 carries. Tyler Algier wasn't very good, 6 for 12, 2 yards per carry. But as a team, the running backs were 4.1 yards per carry. So it's like, average. And you wouldn't expect this sort of pass-run split. So it'll be interesting to see the Falcons as they move forward, if they sort of keep up this very, very heavy passing attack, or if it was just matchup specific with the Buccaneers, who in the past have had a good rush defense, and maybe they did, and kind of a sketchy pass defense, and maybe the Falcons just kind of came into the game wanting to just pass to try to loosen everything up.
The pass worked very well for Drake London if you started him, which you should have, and hopefully you did. 12 catches on 13 targets for 154 yards and a touchdown. Obviously, how high his upside can reach depends on what you just mentioned and where this offense goes. Is Kirk going to be pass heavy? Is this offense going to be pass heavy? If so, I was about to say he's the clear wide receiver 1 and will benefit heavily. Maybe he's the 1A, though, because holy Darnell Mooney had been having a surprisingly good season already without the Falcons kind of being this high-flying offense, because he can make an impact on less usage, just the way he plays the game. But 16 targets, 9 catches, 105 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I assume you don't update your rest of season rankings after Thursday Night Football, but do you have a feel for how high Darnell Mooney could climb?
I wrote him up for sneaky starts, and I said he doesn't have a particularly good matchup this week, but I didn't know that the Falcons were going to throw it 59 times.
Yep.
He had 7, 8, and 6 targets in the 3 games. In the last 3 games, 88 yards, 66 yards, and 56 yards. at that point, he was on pace for a 956-yard season. That has now grown. I saw a tweet today that kind of stated that Darnell Mooney might actually be good. We have an opinion of him based on a lot of games with Justin Fields.
Mm-hmm.
And no knock on Justin Fields, but he's not the most prolific passer. Mooney's best games came with Dalton, Kirk Cousins now. Might be interesting to go back and look at how he has played with pocket quarterbacks and, competent passers, because he is clearly at least the second option in this offense, if not the first at times. Much to Kyle Pitts' chagrin, but Kyle Pitts chipped in with 7 for 88 on 8 targets. There was a report saying, before the game that they wanted to get him more involved, which is maybe the 10th time in his career that we've seen a tweet like that, come out before a game, but they actually did get him more involved. I mean, he might have been just a product of this 59 pass attempt game as well. But I mean, when you have that many 500 passing yards, you can support any number of fantasy receivers. I think the biggest headache here is that Bijan Robinson in a game where the Falcons scored 36 points. He didn't have a terrible game, but 77 total yards with 3 catches, no touchdowns in a game like this really has to have his managers' heads spinning. Algier is enough of a headache, so that Bijan's not getting bell cow type touches. He only had 15 touches in this game. So that's the only issue coming out of it for the Falcons in terms of a fantasy standpoint. Everything else looks great.
Of course, Kyle Pitts waited for everybody to start sitting him for him to do this. But if this offense is headed this direction moving forward, we get another hopefully startable tight end on somewhat consistent basis. It's worth noting there was a lot of tongue-in-cheek tweeting about the fact that he got 1 catch. I think maybe the first catch of the game. It was a pretty decent gain. And then Kirk Cousins didn't target him again for a quarter or two. And everyone was like, well, Kyle Pitts got his 1 catch. He can go back to doing nothing. But he ended up doing a bunch of other stuff, namely 7 total catches for 88, as you mentioned. So great for him. Bijan, I don't have any concern. On the Bucs side of the ball, because of the low yardage for Baker, it wasn't that great for the receivers. Chris Godwin, 5 for 64. Mike Evans, 5 for 62, except that Evans caught 2 touchdown passes. He now has 5 through 5 games. He is just the most locked and loaded, guaranteed good fantasy player maybe in the entire game. I can't remember the last time he wasn't good. Just a true wide receiver 1. Cade Otton, if you were hoping to stream Cade Otton after he's gotten quite a few targets over the past couple of weeks and catches, just 3 catches for 44 yards on 4 targets. This is not surprising to me, and I think we'll see a lot of this. And I've said on the waiver show, I've said on Discord AMAs, this is just going to be the tight end position in general. When we all decide to finally sit Kyle Pitts, he's going to have 7 for 88. When we try to stream Cade Otton because he had 8 targets a game the prior 2 weeks, he's going to have a bad game. It's tough to figure out. And the running backs, Rachaad White, 10 for 72. So he's been much more efficient the past couple of weeks. Bucky Irving, 9 for 44 on the ground. Neither were that involved in the receiving game, and obviously neither scored. So you don't love that for either of them. Somehow I guess the Sterling Shepard touchdown was a problem. Are you interested in adding Sterling Shepard? I guess I'll just throw that out there.
No, not really. He's probably behind Trey Palmer and was it McMillan as well?
Yeah, both were out this game.
Both guys were out this week, so Sterling got some run. Otton 3 for 44. There was a guy, I forget the handle in the chat, that was talking about his elite usage for a tight end, and I was like, okay, and I started looking at it, and the last 2 weeks were better. The first 2 weeks were very low usage, but 3 for 44 is actually a pretty good stat line given the tight end position. I mean, it's actually sort of usable. And then if you're also looking at just the share, the Bucs really, I think, kind of dropped the ball in terms of their pass run splits. I mean, his 44 yards was a 24% share. His 4 targets for like a 16% share. So that's pretty good for a tight end. So I just would throw that out there. But they ran the ball 26 times and passed it 24 times. They can't run the ball very well. They did in this game only because Rachaad White broke a 56-yard run. If you look at the other 9 carries, he totaled 16 yards. Bucky Irving was okay, 5 yards, 4.9 yards per carry. He had a 16-yard run as well, and Mayfield carried it 6 times for 42 yards. So I guess, some of those are probably scrambles. Maybe they weren't all these called runs. But I would like to see them throwing the ball 35, 40 times, given the makeup of their team and all the receivers they have and just the usual difficulty that they have running the ball. They stuck with it last night, kept them in the game, went into overtime, and they lost. So I don't know if they're going to take anything from what the Falcons did to them and maybe be a little bit more pass heavy moving forward.
Yeah. It was a great game. Go check it out if you missed it. All right. We will get to the news and the injury updates. Reminder, if you're in a chat, YouTube or Twitter, feel free to drop questions in there. We'll get to Q&A at the end of the show. The bigger, broader, deeper football questions you've got, the more likely we are to tackle it and answer it. Those are what we prefer versus start-sit stuff, which you can get by hopping onto 4for4.com and checking out John Paulson's rankings. So do that. All right. The biggest, I think, piece of general news is Davante Adams. Now, we don't have the actual piece of news that we hope to get at some point, but it's as of right now, it seems pretty much certain that he will not be playing another snap for the Raiders. And no, not because of his hamstring injury, though I heard a rumor through the grapevine that, and by that I mean a report, that his hamstring injury is actually real. I'm not sure if I believe it or not. But meanwhile, he has requested a trade, and the Raiders seem intent on giving him that trade if they can find a suitor. They reportedly want a second-round pick plus, and the top interested parties are the Jets, very unsurprisingly, with Aaron Rodgers there, and Garrett Wilson not yet at least stepping up as the true one. He maybe would be much more effective too. The Steelers are interested, also not surprising after the Brandon Ayuk saga this offseason. We know they're willing to pay, so they may be in high contention. And the Bills and Chiefs I've seen mentioned as like keeping an eye on the situation. Don't really know whether either of them would pull the trigger there. The Bills obviously don't have a true one. The Chiefs, after losing Rashee Rice, don't have a true one, so they would make sense. Kansas City always seems to hodgepodge together a solution for these kinds of problems. So I don't know about them, but do you have a guess, a projection, a take? Do you prefer to stay away from that stuff? What does it mean for fantasy? A, for where he goes, B, for who might be affected on those teams, and C, for Jacoby Myers, maybe Trey Tucker.
Yeah, I try to stay away from all speculation because we sit there and talk about it, and then you talk and talk and talk, and then actually something happens, and I would rather just focus on that when the news breaks in order to update all the rankings and everything. But just generally speaking, if he goes to a team, it's going to hurt the top receiver at that team. It's going to help the quarterback. So you can just sort of look at it that way. He is probably, depends on where he goes, whether or not it helps him or not. Jets would be a pretty good landing spot for him, given his familiarity with Aaron Rodgers. But if he goes to like Pittsburgh, with Justin Fields at quarterback, this is not an upgrade for him. He's now having to build a rapport with a new quarterback out of the blue midseason. Bills would be interesting because Josh Allen is that talented, and there is a sort of a hole there. Khalil Shakir has been serving as the team's de facto wide receiver one and playing well, but they still lack that true alpha that Davante Adams would bring. I don't know if he wants to go to Buffalo. That's a whole nother story. Western Michigan or Western New York in the winter is not, he's used to it though, I guess, with playing for the Packers.
True.
I would like to focus on the fallout with the Raiders. I think that Jacoby Myers gets a pretty sizable bump into, from wide receiver 5, wide receiver 6 territory to wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 territory. Sort of depends on the matchup in any given week. how many buys there are, et cetera, where he'll be ranked. But he's a proven producer. He's not a stud, but he's 800, 900-yard guy in New England and can produce some good, especially in PPR formats. And then Trey Tucker has been playing pretty well. He had 81% of the snaps, 85% of the snaps in the last 2 weeks. He had 7 for 96 and a touchdown on 9 targets against Carolina. Then last week against Cleveland, 5 for 41 and 6 targets, plus a 3-yard touchdown run. I just feel like he's going to be available on most waiver wires, whereas Myers probably isn't. So if you're looking to sort of capitalize on the situation, Trey Tucker is certainly an interesting player. And maybe it's 12-team deeper formats a bit, but if I needed a receiver and wanted a wide receiver 5 type to be able to sprinkle in, I think he's got the potential to kind of grow into more given the likely snap shares he's going to see. He's already seeing them with Adams out. So obviously helps Brock Bowers as well. So that's where we are with the Raiders fallout and Davante Adams. I don't think there's anything I didn't touch on there, but if there was, let me know.
No, that sounds about right. We will have an update hopefully next week. It really does depend on whether a team is willing to pay what the Raiders want. It feels like these high-profile, high-pick trades are rare, but given the dysfunction, I guess, in the family here in Vegas, where it really doesn't seem like Adams will play for them again, they might have to give him away for something maybe a little less than they want to. Otherwise, they're getting nothing for it.
I just want to note the Chiefs are probably would be the best landing spot for him.
Yeah,
but
fantasy wise,
the Raiders are very unlikely to trade him in division unless they get a really nice compensation package for him,
which seems very unlikely from Kansas City. But the interesting transition there, the Chiefs with Rashee Rice, it's a very interesting, complicated, sort of odd situation in terms of the reporting there. I feel like usually we would know by now what to expect from Rice, what the injury is. We really still don't. He has been placed on IR. Unsurprising, the knee injury we knew was going to knock him out for a significant period of time. But apparently they are waiting for swelling in his knee to reduce before conducting additional tests and possibly getting second opinions that give them and us eventually a more solid expectation of what the injury is, whether he'll be out for the entire season or maybe make a late return. It seems most likely at this point that he will not make a fantasy relevant return. It would have to be, we're already in week 5 now. If you miss 4 weeks, you're already in week 9. There's not that many seasons or weeks left in the fantasy season. Obviously, if he comes back by the end of the NFL season, he's available for the playoffs. That's a big deal for the Chiefs, but not as important for fantasy. General fallout here. What's your expectation? Let's just assume he's out for the vast majority of the fantasy season. What's your expectation for the other guys there?
Well, as I understand it, as I understand with Rice, they're going to scope. They're actually going to send in a camera and to see what's going on. They don't think that the ACL, or they think the ACL might not be fully torn, which would be certainly a good news for him in terms of possibly returning this season. But, just kind of keeping track of Jeff Muller's feed here, it doesn't seem like this is going to result in a 4-week absence. It's probably going to be longer than that. I would probably, if you're holding him, I probably would continue just to see what the results of these tests are. I don't know how much there is to be gained by cutting him immediately, where you could get him back maybe for the last 3 or playoff run, and he was a wide receiver 1 at that point. Mm-hmm. So I probably would just wait and see what's going on. I wouldn't cut him for Trey Tucker, for example, right now.
Yeah.
As far as what's going on in Kansas City, I think this is just the best news for Travis Kelce's production. Obviously, the Chiefs would love to have Rashee Rice, but Kelce immediately had 9 targets with Rice knocked out of the game. Worthy's role was kind of unchanged. He had 4 targets, but I do think there's upside there if they can get him more involved. He has been really productive on his touches and his targets that he's had so far. And the scuttlebutt is that Juju Smith-Schuster is the one that's going to be taking a lot of these routes. So just kind of file that away. I wouldn't run out and pick him up, but if he puts a good game together here, or if you're in a really deep league and you just want somebody who's running 80% of the routes, Smith-Schuster might be that guy. Justin Watson is there as well, but Smith-Schuster seems to probably be the best suited to take a lot of these slants and shorter routes that Rashee Rice was crushing on the first few weeks of the season.
Yeah. They also have Mecole Hardman still. They have Sky Moore, who actually got a couple targets in that game that Rice left. None of these guys, I think it's fair to say, are going to step up and be Rice or anything close to that. Someone might get the majority of his routes, but I wouldn't be surprised if they just mix and match to fill those in. And then as far as the targets are concerned, which is obviously the most important thing, I feel heavily that they're going to swing to Travis Kelce. I think we're going to get from Travis Kelce what everybody wanted when they drafted him as tight end 1 and then didn't get for the first month of the season, because he's the reliable guy that they know they can go to. I think they were maybe trying to save him and store him up for the playoffs, but you're going to need to win games to make it there. Obviously, that's not difficult for the Chiefs, but Travis Kelce feels like their best opportunity to do that. And then maybe the running backs will also get a little more involved in the receiving game. They have really 4 now that can catch passes, so that's not a bad opportunity either. Another transition there, just quickly noting, Clyde Edwards-Helaire has been designated to return for the Chiefs. I guess I'll just ask really quickly this way. What the heck do you want to do with this backfield, if anything?
Well, I've mentioned the FFPC team I have with Connor, and we're in kind of dire straits right now in our backfield. We got Cam Akers starting again this week. Got the good news that Mixon was going to sit out another week, but we lost Pacheco. And we picked up Edwards-Helaire just to see. I mean, he's been dealing with PTSD apparently this off season and has been cleared to practice. And I guess the one thing you'd put in his favor is that all off season the Chiefs chose him over Kareem Hunt, who was available as a free agent this entire time. Immediately, Carson Steele, after his fumble, he gets to start. Steele does, like we thought he would, and then he gets a fumble, and then it's just basically he had one touch after that, and it was the Kareem Hunt show. So Kareem Hunt has popped up on the injury report. So keep an eye on that. But it would not be shocking if in a couple of weeks Edwards-Helaire is leading this backfield, because he's done it before. He's not an outstanding productive player, but he's been decent in spots and for stretches in the past, and he was a high draft pick and all that. So if he can work his way back into the RB1 role, then he'll be in our fantasy RB2, RB3 in this offense. I don't know if they're going to give Steele another opportunity, or if this is he's kind of cooked for the short term. But you also have P. Ryan there, who's just a good pass catcher. So this is just kind of a muddled mess right now. But if you're in dire straits, Edwards-Helaire is not a bad stash just to sort of see what happens in this very productive backfield.
I would assume that Kareem Hunt is your highest ranked this week.
This week, yes.
Does he crack RB3 territory?
Yeah, he's right now at RB22, but we've got 4 to 6 teams on bye. I forget how many. So, I mean, you're just kind of bumping these guys up into territory they probably shouldn't be in. But he's in those low end RB2 ranks, given the workload he had last week for a really good, team, the Chiefs.
Yeah. Great news. Nick Chubb is not only had his practice window open, but he is getting practice in. We saw some Twitter video of him working against some resistance bands or something. Obviously coming off the massive knee injury from last year. This guy recovers from knee injuries extremely well. So he's getting in limited practice and could be back sooner than later. Just keep an eye on that, of course. If he happens to be available in your league, you should absolutely go stash him. And Jerome Ford is obviously quickly losing value. And then similarly, the Panthers opened the 21-day practice window for Jonathan Brooks. I have not yet seen that he is practicing, which is not too surprising. But that practice window is open, which, if you don't know, essentially they open this 21-day period after they've been on a reserve list. And if they can practice in that period, then now they can be activated. And so they are essentially saying, we think we're getting Brooks back into the fold here in the next couple weeks. Obviously, also very big for anyone who stashed him. Both guys could be league winners down the stretch. Did you get Chubb and Brooks in the Scott fishbowl, or just Chubb? I know you got Chubb.
I just got Chubb.
Okay, I got Brooks. So we're covering both bases here. And boy, does my team need it. I have Pacheco, so that would be great. And then the last of that kind of trio of potential league winners who had knee injuries, TJ Hawkinson, who had an ACL tear last year, was designated to return from the PUP today. So he will also be coming back probably in the next few weeks. Early on in the offseason, or really late in the offseason, we got a report that they were targeting week 9. This might mean that he'll be back even sooner than that, which obviously would be great. With Sam Darnold playing quarterback the way he is, obviously there's a lot of mouths to feed there, but TJ Hawkinson, assuming he comes back at majority health, slots in where for you among tight ends once he's on the field?
Yeah, so last year, or the last couple of years with Cousins, he's been basically a top 3 type tight end. And I think heading into this season, we were looking at the quarterback situation in Minnesota and just kind of downgrading him. Plus, he's coming off of an ACL, and we just weren't sure when he was going to be back. So he was ranked in the tight end 2 type rankings, draft him and stash, and, maybe you could use him later on. I bet you a lot of people have cut him, just kind of having to do the normal things you have to do with your roster as you try to make it better. So I would look, if you have any sort of tight end issues, you're not comfortable with your tight end position, I would look and just check the waiver wire, see if he's out there, because with the way that Sam Darnold is playing, this offense is just a lot better than we thought it was going to be. And if he's back and he's full go and getting 70-80% of the snaps, he's going to be ranked as a tight end 1. I mean, he's very likely to see, he's a target earner at the position, and this has been a really bad year for the position so far. So he's going to be ranked up there on a weekly basis once he's back up to speed. So this is definitely a guy you should look for and stash. And if you want to try to trade for him, that's fine too. I wouldn't give up a ton, but you might have a manager in your league that's got some depth at the position and could use something that you have. It'd be worth, trading away a wide receiver 2-3 maybe for him, or, running back 2-3 for him potentially. It sort of depends on the situation and your depth, but he's one that we should be looking at if you want to have a good tight end for the stretch run.
Also, a shout out to you, and I think we may have had some guests that were on this train as well. Sam Darnold is just incredible. I don't know what else to say. I'm at about like 90%, 93% convinced at this point this week's game against the Jets in London is the decider for me. If he does well against this Jets secondary in the revenge game, I will be fully in MVP candidate. Sign me up. He has not had Jordan Addison for most of the season, got him back last year and immediately threw a touchdown to him. Now he's going to also get TJ Hawkinson back. Are we talking like a top 6 quarterback rest of season? Or is he just a QB1? Am I getting crazy?
Yeah, I mean, top 6 is maybe a stretch, but he's entering high-end QB2, low-end QB1 territory, certainly streamable and all these good matchups, and he's just been very productive. I mean, I think the thing that we learned from this, and we've seen it before with Geno Smith, guys that sort of flame out early in their careers, didn't get much of a chance perhaps, or just didn't have a good situation. They hang on, they bounce around. Like for me, the signal with Darnold was that Kyle Shanahan saw enough, and we know Kyle Shanahan's good, a good coach,
True.
saw enough in Darnold that he wanted him to be the backup in San Francisco. And then Darnold did have a good stretch of games, at least when you look at the stat sheet, in hhis last stint in Carolina. And him landing in Minnesota, it wasn't like the second coming or anything. We thought that, the rookie was going to be the guy eventually starting, but he had kind of won that job, at least in the preseason. They were going to ease the rookie in. I'm blanking on the rookie's name from Michigan.
McCarthy.
Yeah, McCarthy. I knew it was JJ. I didn't want to say something wrong. JJ McCarthy. So in a redraft mindset, I just push his name off to next year. I got to remember
Very
next
fair.
year. But Darnold was playing better than him in camp, and then so now you start to think, okay, this guy's decent, and I think we have a lot of faith now in Kevin O'Connell as a head coach and his system, because it seems like Darnold has been able to thrive, and obviously, Justin Jefferson giving him a target like that. But I mean, he didn't, he had Aaron Jones and Justin Jefferson for the first few weeks there with Addison sidelined. Naylor was doing okay. Didn't have a ton of weapons and was still producing. So yeah, I think he's certainly going to be that low end QB1 conversation rest of the season.
Main takeaway here: if you're in a dynasty league, stash away Bryce Young for when he goes to the Rams and Sean McVay fixes him, and he's a great quarterback one for the rest of his life. That's my takeaway. Briefly, the Patriots head coach Gerard Mayo said that the team is considering not essentially benching Rhamondre Stevenson over his fumbling issues. He's fumbled once a game, or maybe more accurately, just putting Antonio Gibson ahead of him. Do you have concern over this? Real, fake?
Well, they're saying that they're considering it. I wouldn't expect a huge sea change this week. I think maybe this is Mayo just putting Stevenson on notice that he needs to fix his ball security. So I still have him leading this backfield this week. It's not like Antonio Gibson is some stalwart ball control guy either. He's got his own ball control issues, fumbling issues in the past, but certainly we could see some more Gibson. He's played pretty well this season. And, I would be a little bit, I have Stevenson in one league, and I am a little bit worried that he's not the rock solid 20 touch player that he was. If he puts the ball on the floor or on the ground again, it's, he might be benched for the rest of the game.
Yeah, it's been ugly there. Tyler Huntley will start for Miami again. This is somewhat unsurprising. Week 4 wasn't great. And it particularly was not great for the receivers as we had hoped it would be, but obviously he was freshly added, had not had much time to get into the offense. It was his first start. Do you have some more optimism for particularly Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle in this week and moving forward until Tua comes back, which we're getting word that there's a real possibility could be somewhere in the week 8-9 range?
I'm not optimistic after last week's. I was expecting a better performance. He did get, from a fantasy standpoint, he did okay because he got the rushing touchdown. He rushed for 44 yards, but from a passing standpoint, it was the same sort of production that we saw with Baltimore, and that was like 5.9 yards per attempt in Baltimore, and that's not good enough. And it's not going to, and it's not good enough when you have Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle and Devin Achane. Catching the ball. Like, he should be better than this. And I would have thought after a week of reps that he would be doing better. So, these games in New England this week, they're 11th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. Just history has been that New England is a pretty good defense. I don't know if that's really the case anymore with Bill Belichick out of there. They just maybe kind of mediocre, but you're not expecting this to be a coming out party for Tyler Huntley. So I have him ranked wide receiver 26 and Tyreek Hill's at wide receiver 25. This is just sort of uncharted territory for these players right now, given the state of this passing attack. I need to see it on the field before, I'm going to rank them as must starts.
Yeah, very fair. Lastly, if you haven't heard this already, you're not on the Twitter streets for sure. But if you're not, Christian McCaffrey, just the only update we've gotten recently is reportedly this Achilles tendonitis that he's been dealing with is not in just one leg, but in multiple, aka both, multiple legs, like he's a spider. Not good, but we don't really know what it means yet. I don't know if the 49ers know what it means, although they certainly have seemed to know more than they let on this entire time, which is pretty frustrating, especially for anyone who drafted CMC number 1 overall. We still don't really know when or if he'll be back. So we'll just keep monitoring that. But update for you, not great for fantasy or for CMC or for the 49ers. Rest of the injury updates for the week. We'll kind of go semi-quick through these. Jonathan Taylor is not practicing with that high ankle injury and is not expected to play. This is not surprising based off the injury from last week. So it will be Trey Sermon most likely. Obviously not the most reliable of backups necessarily, but I think you have some confidence in Trey Sermon.
I've got him at running back 20. I picked him up in a couple of leagues. The matchup's great against the Jaguars. They're 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and I would expect him to get the bulk of the carries. They've got Goodson there as well, Tyler Goodson, who's kind of he's made a couple plays in the past, but I would expect Sermon to be the primary back. He's a sneaky start.
Yeah. Austin Ekeler, who missed last week with a concussion, is a full participant in practice. Meanwhile, Brian Robinson, with a knee injury, has not practiced all week. I did see a report literally 1 minute before we went live that he was spotted at Friday's practice. Not sure in what capacity. So you'll need to keep an eye on that. The Browns' run defense has been very suspect. So Brian Robinson was one of my favorite starts of the week coming into this. If he misses and Austin Ekeler is alone in that backfield, how high does he climb for you, do you think?
Well, he's not alone because Jeremy McNichols had a good game
True.
last week. So what I think would happen if Brian Robinson, I mean, I had Brian Robinson near my top 10 or in my top 10 with
Yeah.
assuming Ekeler was still out with the concussion and but then Ekeler started to come back and look like he was going to play. So you start to, and then you see that Brian Robinson's not practicing. You're starting to bump them down. So what I think would happen is, obviously Brian Robinson gets removed from the rankings if he can't play. Ekeler and
McNichols.
Ekeler and McNichols.
Yeah.
God, I'm looking at a list of names here.
Very
Jeremy
forgettable
McNichols had like 2 touchdowns last week, right? He did a great game. So
Yes,
I
he
think
did.
I think Ekeler gets bumped up into maybe the low 20s. It's a weird week with running back. If you look at the 20s, it's pretty ugly. So I think Ekeler would be up there. And then Jeremy McNichols would, sort of be in the 30s as an RB3 spot start.
Ekeler has looked surprisingly good on his more limited touches before the concussion. It's worth remembering that, like, if he is 90% or more of the Austin Ekeler of the last or the couple years before last year when it really seemed to fall off, that's one of the best, most productive running backs in fantasy. So could be a really interesting play if Brian Robinson misses this or more weeks. Malik Nabers, goodness gracious, we just can't have nice things. Suffered a concussion last week and will not play in week 5. All expectations would be that he's back after that, but for this week, he is out. Devin Singletary was not practicing for the majority of the week with a groin injury. I saw a report that he will practice today, but you're going to want to watch the final injury report there to see whether he's expected to play on Sunday. Certainly with Malik Nabers out regardless, but then also if Devin Singletary out, Wan'Dale Robinson, I mean, is he a wide receiver 2 in PPR? Better?
Yeah, I think I looked at PPR ranks before it came on, and he's at like wide receiver 17 with updated. Yeah. I took Nabers out of the projections, bumped up Wan'Dale a little bit. I didn't have to do too much, and he's up there into that range. Now, the thing with Wan'Dale is that he just doesn't have the touchdown upside as some of these other guys that are going to be going there. He has a good chance of seeing 10, 12 targets, but whether or not he has that kind of boom capability is questionable given the Giants passing game in general. But he is a nice, like, high floor wide receiver 2, I think, this week. And we'll see, how much Nabers being on the field helps him. Like,
True.
there is a situation here where now the focus is on Robinson. He's not up to the task of earning all these targets. That's the one concern I would say. But in general, Nabers is like getting 40, 50% of the targets. So there's this giant pile. And I would say that Darius Slayton is now a decent dart throw. He played a lot. He ran a lot of snaps last week, just basically wind sprints. But he had a couple of 700+ yard seasons in 2022 and 2023. So I think if you're really desperate, he's not a bad play. Jalen Hyatt will play some more as well. And then at tight end, maybe Theo Johnson pops his head up this week. Like, they need him. They need pass catchers, and he's playing a lot. So who knows? And then at running back, I'm kind of keeping an eye on that Singletary right now. I've got him at RB22. If he's out, then Tyrone Tracy, I think, would get the bulk of the touches and become a sneaky start, in that RB2, RB3 range.
Yeah. Worth noting on Wan'Dale, to your point about upside, like, even 15 targets for him really means like 7 or 8 normal targets, because his ADOT is like 2 yards downfield, if that. He's averaging 7.5 yards per reception this year, which is closer to a good running back than a good wide receiver. But in PPR, that's kind of where it really counts, because if he gets 8 catches and they're all for 5 yards, that's still a pretty decent game.
I could easily see him with 10 catches for 75 yards and 17.5 PPR. And that's the problem with PPR, but we won't get into that.
True. Joe Mixon, with his ankle injury, has not practiced and is not expected to play. That's the same thing for Dameon Pierce. Cam Akers, after what we saw in his attempt at being the starter, really didn't feel like we could trust him again. But both guys are expected to be out again, which means he will be the starter. It is a good matchup against the Bills. I think you mentioned you were starting him in that FFPC league. Where does he fall in your rankings?
We have to start him after, Connor insisted we take Gus Edwards and not J.K. Dobbins. We have to, but they're on bye anyway this week. But we're in a tough spot. But Akers, it's a good matchup against the Bills. It's the Bills' numbers are a little misleading. They're 32nd last in the league in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. So I am sort of bullish on it. But a lot of that is because of Derrick Henry's 199 yards or whatever he had last week. Other backs have done pretty well against them as well. And they're really good against the pass. So teams have, tended to lean towards the run because that's been more effective. We'll see what the Texans do, but I'm expecting, 10 to 14 carries for Akers, depending on how this game sort of unfolds. I don't know that he's going to, maybe a 1-catch, 2-catch type of a player. Dare Ogunbowale has been pretty good, and he could be a PPR deep dart throw type guy in a game that, if the Texans are trailing, then he could, catch quite a few passes. But he's been pretty involved as a receiver while Mixon has been out, basically taking over Mixon's receiving role, with Akers taking over the rushing role.
Raheem Mostert is back practicing with a chest injury. He has a very strong chance to play for the first time since week 1. Obviously, this is not the offense that it was under Tua, where you can have 2 viable running backs. I don't even know how strong we feel about having 1 viable running back. Is he startable, or are we waiting for Tua to come back?
I mean, if you're desperate, you might get – this is just – offense is just not the same, and they're probably going to feature Achane regardless. So now you've got maybe a 10-carry player. I mean, if you're desperate and they decide maybe Mike McDaniel decides they're going to go super run heavy because they can't throw the ball very well, that's possible. They're not running very effectively either. So I would say Mostert, if I did, I haven't put him yet back into the rankings, but I think he'll probably be, RB4 type, sadly.
Yeah. Khalil Shakir, to my great chagrin, after his great start to the season, is out. This is very recent news and somewhat surprising, I think, with an ankle injury. Does his absence, given how much he was being used, filter to another wide receiver for you, or mainly to Dalton Kincaid, or does it just hurt Josh Allen?
I probably feel better about Kincaid. Just given the way the other receivers have played. Keon Coleman's been okay. I bumped him up to wide receiver 49. Curtis Samuel might get starter snaps finally. He's been kind of a part-time player after they gave him a pretty good contract. I have him wide receiver 55, and then Matt Collins at wide receiver 63. But this could be like the Kincaid, James Cook show with maybe one of these receivers doing something. I wouldn't count on a ton of production from the Buffalo receivers, given what we've seen so far.
Yeah, agree there. No reliability from those receivers to me. Trey McBride, upgraded to a full participant practice, missed last week with a concussion, should play. Thank heavens. We need these tight ends, and he's been, one of the, if not the best, reliably. Evan Engram, with a hamstring injury that he's missed the past several weeks with, is practicing again. He has a chance to be back. Check today's practice report and the final injury report there. That will be another big boon because he seems like a guy who could, be one of the more reliable 5-6 catch tight ends. Anthony Richardson was hit with his oblique injury, was limited in practice. His status is kind of unknown, borderline. You're going to have to keep an eye on that one. I think, there's multiple questions here actually, so I'll throw them to you and we'll try to make it quick. One, are you starting Anthony Richardson with any confidence if he plays, because he hadn't been that reliably good? And 2, what difference does it make to the pass catchers there between whether it's Richardson or Joe Flacco, who came in and was very impressive last week?
I do have Richardson in the projections, and he's QB 13. Jacksonville's 32nd against quarterbacks, so great matchup. Yeah, is it 100% confident that he's going to play great? No, but there should be points available for him, and he has, it's like kind of roulette with him. It's like you get one great throw and you get one terrible throw, and it's just whether or not the defense can catch the interceptions. But I think he's fine, and he's a good runner and all that. So we'll see. If Flacco were to start, you feel a lot better about the passing attack of this team because he's just a competent passer, and they have a bunch of then there's going to be more pass attempts because there's fewer runs. Probably the play caller feels more confident in calling pass plays because it's Flacco over Richardson right now, just given that you don't know what you're going to get necessarily from Richardson. So you'd feel better about Pittman and Downs and maybe even Alec Pierce if Flacco's starting, but I do think that Richardson looks like he is going to play.
And then Christian Watson, his high ankle sprain is reportedly mild, still likely to miss a couple weeks, certainly this one. You could probably go on for 15 minutes about this, but mainly I want to know, and you tell me what you want to tell me, but mainly I want to know what the pecking order is in your belief while Watson is out.
Well, Jaden Reed is my wide receiver 5.
Dang.
He's just producing, and this is a great matchup, and he's got Jordan Love back, and he's the number 1 receiver for this team. Basically, coming into the season, it was clear from last year that whenever Christian Watson was healthy, they were trying to get him the ball, which was understandable given his incredible athleticism and deep speed. Starting with the Eagles game, however, Jaden Reed has asserted himself, and it's clear that he is a much bigger part of the game plan on a weekly basis than he was last year. Because whenever Watson was available, his numbers would dip.
Yep.
That hasn't been the case this year. So Reed is the wide receiver 1 here, and then you get into who's number 2, because that's the most interesting thing this week with Watson out. But I think both Dontavian Wicks and Dobbs could end up posting good fantasy lines. It might be one or the other, but it might be both. I'm excited about Dontavian Wicks because I think we saw last week with Watson knocked out of the game fairly early that he ended up with 13 targets. Love kept going back to him, even though he had a couple of drops. He ended up with 2 touchdowns in a big game, and he has produced whenever he's given the opportunity. So I've got him ranked fairly high, wide receiver 23, and Dobbs at wide receiver 39. Maybe those two should be a little closer together, but I'm trying to make a statement that if you have Dontavian Wicks, you need to probably start him this week against a shaky Rams defense. So that's where I'm at with it. You might see a little Bo Melton pop his head in as well, because he's probably the best wide receiver 5 in the league, real world, and he's going to get some extra snaps as well. Malik Heath will maybe pop his head up as well, but also just keep an eye on the tight end, Tucker Kraft, tight end 7 this week. And I might have to change my start sits of the week to account for the fact that I'm talking about him now. But I did say on the pod before last week that Kraft was a sneaky pickup because getting Jordan Love back, he was playing starter snaps. Now Luke Musgrave has been missing some time. I think Kraft's going to play a lot of snaps against the Rams and deliver.
I am starting Tucker Kraft in multiple leagues this week. If he's on your waiver wire, he should not be. And if you're battling over somebody like Cade Otton, which you're not anymore because he already played, but if you left him out because you weren't sure, Tucker Kraft is a great play. Tight end 7 should be everything you need to know in that regard. All right, let's tackle some matchups quickly, and then we'll get to these starts and sits. Game of the week seems to be the Ravens and the Bengals. Has 49.5 point over under. I think the main question here is, we know who all the stars are. We're starting all of those guys. Do you have any sleepers? Is it a Yosivash game, a Justice Hill? Any interest there? Or are you just expecting big games from the big guys?
I think you could use Justice Hill, Yoshi, I'll call him. If you need, like, if you're desperate, I mean, you don't want to use these guys unless you have to. Justice Hill was good last week, but I don't know if we're going to see that sort of passing role every week. They want to get Zay Flowers involved. I think they actually do want to get Mark Andrews involved so that John Harbaugh doesn't have to keep answering questions about why Mark Andrews is not involved. So I think at some point he's going to have a good game as well, and it might be this week.
And then the fade of the week is Raiders at Broncos. With Davante Adams not playing, I legitimately want to know if Brock Bowers is playing, you're playing Brock Bowers. But outside of that, are you starting literally anyone in this game with any confidence?
Well, Denver is first in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So, Jacoby Myers would normally, if he had a mediocre matchup, he'd probably be ranked, around wide receiver 30. He's ranked wide receiver 37 this week. And I mentioned Trey Tucker, wide receiver 46. He might be at wide receiver 40, wide receiver 42 or something like that if he had a decent matchup. But this is a tough one. Denver's defense has been playing lights out thus far, and they're actually a pretty interesting fantasy defense rest of the season given their schedule.
Yeah. And then as far as matchups go, adjusted fantasy points wise, again, we'll hit a couple good and a couple bad that are more on the fringe of startability. Well, some of them are not, and you're just maybe looking for a DFS play. On the good side for quarterbacks, we mentioned it. You mentioned it. Anthony Richardson / Joe Flacco, whoever plays, gets a Jaguars D that is 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the quarterback. So Anthony Richardson's your QB 13. I assume that means you didn't rank Flacco. Is he streamable if he's the starter for you?
Yeah. I mean, he's looking at this week. I mean, you got kind of Dak Prescott at 16 and a tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Caleb Williams against Carolina at 17. Would you want to start Flacco over those guys? I think maybe you would. Sam Darnold at 18 playing the Jets in London. I don't know how good I feel about that. So yeah, I think he'd be in that sort of 16 to 20 range, depending on how the numbers shake out.
Love it. And then Jordan Love is facing the Rams. You hit on that matchup with the receivers. Obviously, you're starting Jordan Love, but this should be another big game from him, which is nice. And Deshaun Watson gets the Commanders, who obviously have been historically the best matchup for quarterbacks over the past couple years. They're currently 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Does he also fall in the streamability category? Maybe in comparison to those other guys you just mentioned.
Yeah, he's my start of the week at quarterback, so we don't need to talk about him later. But that matchup against the Commanders, 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. He runs the ball a little bit as well. He should have a good game.
Nice. Bad side, Patrick Mahomes is going up against the Saints, who are 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed. Moreover, Patrick Mahomes has just not been very good for fantasy. I don't know how many of his managers have caught on to this yet. I would assume several because they're seeing the fantasy output each week. But it's hard sometimes with someone who's this good in real life to recognize he has not been good for fantasy. So in a tough matchup with the production he's been putting out, I'm interested where he falls for you and whether you'd stream some of the guys we just mentioned over him.
Yeah, he's averaging 14.1 fantasy points per game through 4 starts. I think in most cases you're still starting him over some of these guys. I mean, you can start to get too cute with it when you're taking a player like I would still start Mahomes over Deshaun Watson because Mahomes is just a lot better than Deshaun Watson. I think he's got a higher ceiling if this is a surprisingly high scoring game. So that's sort of where I'm at with him. I mean, he's at QB 10, which is very low for him, but still a low on QB 1.
Okay. If this continues, he continues to fall, I assume.
Yeah, but he's always going to be ranked as sort of a high-end QB 2 at the very lowest because of his upside.
Yep. Very fair. And then Geno Smith, if you're coming off last week, really liking what you got there. He's facing the Giants, who are 6th in adjusted fantasy points. I don't think you want to stream him this week if you can get away. Him versus Deshaun or Flacco, are you going to the streamer there?
Well, he came in the top 8, I think, and I've got him at QB 9 just based on being a favorite. His production so far, feel pretty confident with this offensive coordinator, Grubb. So, he's got a good receiving core as well. So I'm still sticking with Regino. He's also running the ball a little bit. So still feel pretty good about him, even though the matchup AFPA-wise is not great.
Yeah. At running back, we hit briefly on the Texans matchup against the Bills. Mixon will be out, so it's Cam Akers against that 32nd ranked AFPA defense. That's a great one. Hopefully we get something better from Cam Akers. He had a good matchup in his last outing as a starter, so we want to see something better there. The Bears running backs, it looks like it's going to be DeAndre Swift, but maybe they give another look to Roschon Johnson. We'll see. They get the Panthers, who are 31st. And then we also hit on Trey Sermon against the Jaguars, who are 30th. So all 3 of those bring some interesting plays. Does Roschon Johnson become of any interest to you? And do you have any confidence in DeAndre Swift? I think that's the main question.
Well, what a difference a week makes. I mean, I think DeAndre Swift was a sit for me last week. He ends up with 170 total yards because, it looked like Roschon Johnson was going to take over that backfield. And it was also kind of a bad matchup. And he ends up with just going crazy. And now he's my RB 13 this week against Carolina, 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed. It's just it's a weird week for these running backs.
Weird game.
Like it's weird. So I would expect that he had that huge game. He's going to see the bulk of this and be a lot better than he has been the first 3 weeks.
All right. Big for DeAndre Swift drafters. Hopefully you didn't drop him. I saw a lot of that. Don't drop him. On the bad side, Alvin Kamara gets the Chiefs. They are first against running backs and adjusted fantasy points, and it's by a lot. They have allowed 7.4 points per game, which is absurd. That being said, Alvin Kamara is a top 3 running back in fantasy right now. He's a must start. I don't think you're not getting him out of your redraft lineups. Maybe he's an avoid in the DFS play if you're doing that kind of thing. Zach Moss gets the Ravens, who are 4th. That's not super ideal if you had any hope that Zach Moss would be a reliable starter. And Zamir White, just in case you were still holding on hope there, which I know a lot of people are, he gets the Broncos, who are 5th. That's a complete sit, I assume, for you.
Yeah, Zamir White's also injured. Alexander Madison might end up with 15 touches or something if Zamir White can't play, and then he might be somewhat useful. Moss was my sit of the week, running back. Baltimore is 4th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. I think you mentioned that. Really tough matchup, and he's also kind of getting pushed out of that lead role by Chase Brown, who had a great game last week.
Yeah, good call. At wide receiver, on the good side, the Colts get the Jaguars, who, as you mentioned, are 32nd. If it's Anthony Richardson, your confidence is in who, if anyone?
Well, he did get 60 yards to Michael Pittman in 2 pass plays last week. So when I saw that Pittman had the big
Anthony Richardson,
Pittman had the big game and Flacco came in. I assume a lot of it came from Flacco, but actually more than half of it was from Richardson. So I mean, I still have the most confidence in Pittman, but Josh Downs is obviously a really good receiver, really good route runner, solid PPR guy. He had a big game last week. A lot of that was from Flacco. So that's just something to keep in mind. I think they're both startable. Pittman probably a little bit more startable than Downs at this point.
And then Alec Pierce a clear 3rd for you, I assume.
Yeah, at this point.
Yeah, okay.
He's definitely seeing his role decrease since Downs got back.
Okay. The Cleveland wide receivers get the Commanders, who, as I mentioned above, very good matchup for quarterbacks. Juicy, 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed. So if you have Amari Cooper, you feel happy about that. Also, there's another player. I have looked down at your starts now since we're apparently hitting all of them, and I'm not going to say the name. I'll leave it for you. And then the Rams wide receivers get the Packers, who have been actually very soft against wide receivers. Obviously, it's a mess there. Jordan Whittington had a good game last week. Demarcus Robinson was the sort of top of the depth chart pick prior to that. Tyler Johnson had a good game, but hasn't really been any good. Are you rolling any of these guys out there, given the good matchup?
Yeah, if you look at the routes, which I tend to on Mondays, doing the distributions for all the teams, kind of seeing the pecking order, especially in situations like this. Jordan Whittington went from running like 10 routes to leading the team or being up there in the top 2 or 3 in routes run, and then Tyler Johnson is basically taking a seat on the bench. So I think it's Whittington, Robinson, and Atwell, and I don't think that we have any great confidence at who's going to have the biggest game in any given week. But I think Atwell has been really efficient in his targets. Whittington is super interesting based on how he did in the preseason and sort of that Cooper Kupp role that he might have in that offense. So, and Demarcus Robinson has actually been kind of disappointing given what he did late last year, having 4 or 5 straight games with a touchdown. Just hasn't been quite as productive this year.
We hit on the Raiders wide receivers against Denver, who are 1st in AFPA. That's really ugly. If you were hoping to pop Jacoby Myers into your lineup with Davante Adams out, it's still doable, but as a much deeper play at wide, like low end, I think you had him as just outside of wide receiver 3 range or at the back of it. So don't feel good about that. Patrick Surtain has been absolutely annihilating wide receiver 1s. So that's a rough look for Jacoby. And then the Panthers wide receivers get the Bears, who are 3rd in AFPA. I think Deontay Johnson has reached must-start status at this point. Tell me if you disagree. But Xavier Legette has also been an interesting pickup and potential play. I think he probably falls out of startability with this matchup.
Yeah, Jalen Johnson's playing like lights out right now. I don't know if he's going to shadow Deontay or if it's going to be a situation where Deontay needs to sort of make his hay when he's not facing that matchup. So it doesn't appear that he's going to shadow, but we'll see. But I think Deontay, with the addition of Andy Dalton, is just showing us how good of a receiver he is, and he is pretty much a must start at this point. I have a tough decision where I have to decide between Deontay and Wan'Dale Robinson, and I'm not sure. Deontay's just been lights out the last couple of weeks.
Yeah. Good matchups for tight ends. The Saints get the Chiefs, who are 32nd. Tyler Conklin gets the Vikings, who are 31st. And Brenton Strange, or hopefully if he plays, Evan Engram, get the Colts, who are 30th. Those are the three worst or best, depending on how you look at it, teams against the tight ends. If you're picking one to stream from those teams, who is it? Assuming Evan Engram doesn't play. If he plays, he's the guy.
Yeah, if he plays, he's the guy. Conklin probably against Minnesota is the best bet. Okay. I am sort of with Taysom Hill out. I am another guy who saw his routes spike last week after not playing much the previous week was Juwan Johnson. So he's sort of intriguing if you are desperate, given the fact that the Chiefs are 32nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. Taysom Hill is out, and so his primary competition is Foster Moreau, who had a touchdown I think in week 1 and hasn't done much since. So I would say Conklin is the clear winner of these three. If it's Strange, Conklin, and Juwan Johnson, but Juwan Johnson's kind of interesting, and Brenton Strange actually kind of interesting if Engram remains out.
Yeah. On the bad side, Pat Freiermuth draws the Cowboys, who are 6th in AFPA against tight ends. Given the tight end landscape, I think you still have to start him, but I think lower expectations there. And then the Ravens tight ends get the Bengals, who are 5th in AFPA. Is Mark Andrews a full-blown sit for you?
He's like my tight end 17. I am sitting him for Tucker Kraft. I think that's an easy decision in one league. And this has been the most perplexing preseason to regular season drop in value that I've seen in some time. This guy has 5 straight seasons of averaging 50 yards per game, has been a rock solid part of this passing attack, and they are just not using him at all. And they're going very run heavy. And I think it's the Derrick Henry factor where they're just deciding to get back to, but even when they were run heavy in the past, Mark Andrews has been productive. So this is really a wild drop in value for him. And I'm hoping that they eventually get it going to where he can get back to that sort of level of production.
I literally cannot remember anything like this ever, where we had this much confidence and history of good play from a fantasy player who just disappeared completely. 17 for Mark Andrews is both insane and incredibly accurately correct. That is wild. What is this world? All right, let's get into the starts and sits. Some of them we poached with the matchups, but give us the ones that you've got, and then we'll get to Q&A.
Yeah, I'll zip through these because we talked about a few of them. But Chuba Hubbard, I've got him in running back 9, so that's higher than usual. He's had two great games. Chicago is better against the pass than they are against the run. They're 24th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs. So I think he's a rock solid, like low-end RB1. We talked about Zach Moss as a sit against a really, really good rush defense with Baltimore. Jerry Jeudy was the guy you were alluding to. Cleveland is quietly having a good year. I've got him at wide receiver 30 this week against Washington, who's 31st in adjusted fantasy points allowed. 2 receivers, sitting Jalen Waddle. I need to see it. Tyreek Hill I could sort of get behind since he's such a, the big part of that offense and could explode with one big play. But Jalen Waddle to me is a little bit less in terms of safety. I've got him as a wide receiver 4 or 5 this week. At tight end, I had to bail on Tucker Kraft because we talked about him earlier. So Colby Parkinson in that same game, running tons and tons of routes. Green Bay is 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. Sitting Dalton Schultz with Tank Dell likely back. He's become the 4th or 5th option in the passing game when all those receivers are healthy. They've got the Dare at running back as well. And then at quarterback, I mentioned Deshaun Watson as a start. You could start him fairly confidently against Washington. And then I would sit Andy Dalton despite the good play the last couple of weeks. Chicago third in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterback. So I think it'll be kind of a quieter game, but I think, Deontay's still startable because he's probably going to see, targets in the 10 to 15 range.
And if you want many more names, go check out the Sneaky Starts article because there's been tons of value to be gained from reading that. All right, let's tackle some Q&A here. Reminder, if your question is very heavily start this player or that player, it's likely we may not get to it here, but you can pop onto 4for4.com and check out John's rankings where you will get that answer quite clearly. Dom asks, do I panic on Bijan? I think it's very unlikely that either of us are going to say yes, panic, but 52 yards and a touchdown in week 3, 74 yards, no scores in week 4, and then 77 yards, no scores in week 5. That doesn't look terrible, but for the guy you expected to be essentially battling for the number 1 running back spot with Breece Hall, given that CMC is out, this is pretty disappointing. What's your just general temperature there on Bijan?
Yeah, and I would just note that if you do want your question answered for sure, a super chat will get you there. We've got one super chat in the chat right now, so maybe we can get to that question next. I don't think it's actually a question. I think it's just somebody wants us to comment on a situation. But Bijan, this is, surprising. I think maybe we overrated the Arthur Smith's aspect of this. Tyler Algier is just better than we thought, and he's earning some touches behind Bijan. He didn't do great last night, so that might maybe get Bijan back into the fold as an RB, like a really rock solid RB1. But I had him at RB7 this week because he's just ceding a lot of touches. Do I panic? No, I don't think you would panic. But he's just, I don't think we're getting, obviously McCaffrey sidelined. Breece Hall is not getting the lines. He's getting the lion's share, but he's not getting like overall RB1 type touches because Braylon Allen's been good, and we're not getting that sort of workload from Bijan Robinson either. It turns out these second, third round running backs were probably better picks at cost.
Derrick Henry, RB1. Book it. Big Mac is the super chat here. Thank you, Big Mac. Says, just traded Dak and Amari Cooper for Goff and Olave. I'm at 4-0, and the 3 other top teams are vetoing my trade. Oh my gosh, unacceptable. First of all, let's just point out this trade is like not even close to being vetoable, not even mildly close. I'm not even sure at a first glance who wins this trade. So this is absurd. There shouldn't be vetoes in leagues at all unless you're playing in like a really, really questionable work league where no one knows what anything is and everybody's colluding. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter and I will send a video rant against your commissioner and these teams to never veto trades, certainly not one like this. John, do you have any stronger feelings?
My message to the other 3, and you could record this and play it for them. The other 3 managers in your league that are vetoing this are acting like cowards. They need to step up, improve their teams however they want. But this trade is totally fine. Dak and Amari for Goff and Olave. This is a very balanced trade. Maybe you have your reasons for doing it, but it's certainly not vetoable. You only veto unless it's clear collusion or perhaps there's an owner who doesn't know that one of their stars got injured or whatever. And all of a sudden the player they're trading for has no value, or player they're trading away. That's the only time that you would veto if there's clear collusion or just a clear mess up. This is beyond the pale.
If you're a commissioner, get vetoes out of your leagues. That's all I have to say about that. Diego asks a trade question. Aaron Jones for Chris Godwin. I like these running back for wide receiver type questions because it's not so easy to find the answers to these just reading around on the internet. Aaron Jones and Chris Godwin have both been very good at their respective positions. If you're looking at this trade, let's assume you have balanced depth, and it's a PPR league, Diego says. Who do you prefer, John?
Well, currently, Godwin, wide receiver 9, Aaron Jones, RB 14. So, I give the slight edge probably to Godwin, maybe less of a injury possibility than Aaron Jones, who tends to get nicked up, miss some games. But Aaron Jones has been great. Can't argue with the talent. He's a super talented guy, and the offense is a lot better than we thought it was going to be. So I think this one depends on if you're shoring up a weakness, which side you would want. Because if you need a running back, if you're trading Jones away, you must have running back depth, and you need to shore up the receiver. And I think that's fair. I think this is a fair trade.
Yeah, another good one. If someone tried to veto it, you should shame them eternally. Emily Robertson. This is a week 5 start sit question, but I want to pull it up because of a particular thing that they say. Who to start as wide receiver 2 behind Chase as wide receiver 1 in non-PPR format when I've wasted my flex on Bucky Irving? Need huge upside. Whittington, Atwell, Tucker, or Leggett. I think based off what we've said in the show today, it would be Whittington, but I'll get your take as well, John. I would just point out as an educational note for Emily and everybody else here and listening on the pod, if you are playing a Thursday Night Football player, or if you're playing a Sunday player, but you expect to play your Monday player at some point, always put the player playing earlier in the actual slot that their position is. So Bucky Irving should be in your running back slot if you're going to play him, not in your flex, because when things happen throughout the week or something goes wrong, you have more options if your flex is still open, as you may be seeing here, Emily. So that's just a big tip there. It's Whittington for me. Do you have a take there?
It's Whittington for me as well. I think Trey Tucker is interesting. I assume that's Trey Tucker who she's talking about. I mean, they're all sort of interesting. They're all right. 40 for Jordan Whittington, 44 for Atwell, 46 for Tucker, and then Leggett is at 45. So they're all crunched together. So I do think that Whittington is probably the best play. And given the matchup against the Packers, that's probably what I would do. They're 29th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. I mean, it could be Atwell might outscore him, but I think Whittington had a big spike in roll last week.
Craigslist user 12 says 4 for 4 member John, big fan. Cool. I see how it is. 10 team half PPR start. Love, Lamb, London, Hall, Connor, Ferguson, Mason, ETN. Oh, those are his starters. Bench is Hurts, JMO. So Jordan Love and Jalen Hurts both being on the team is the main thing here. Braylon Allen and Wicks. Do you trade Jordan Love and ETN for Davante Smith or Joe Mixon? Looking to capitalize. Basically, he's looking to capitalize on having Jalen Hurts and also having a great backup. But sending Love and ETN for injured player, obviously both Davante Smith and Joe Mixon should be healthy very soon, but I don't love that. And even just value wise, I don't think this is enough. John, do you agree or disagree?
Well, I think ETN probably has similar value to Mixon, and he's healthier. So giving a quarterback a top 5 or 8 quarterback in addition to ETN in order to get Mixon, that doesn't do it for me. Devonta Smith, so I'm looking at your receivers. You've got Lamb, London. And then you've got Jameson Williams and Dontavian Wicks as your 3 and 4. I feel like you're okay at receiver as well. I'd probably be looking to do something different. I understand you're trying to use your quarterback depth in order to shore up another position, but I don't think you're getting good enough players at these other 2 positions. Yeah, given what you're giving up.
I would agree. Yep. Mike Yee mentioned the getting out of leagues with vetoes, which I agree with. But then Mike Yee followed that up with, might as well have kickers in your league too, lol. And I just had to bring this up to say, don't shame kickers. Kickers are people too. I have a couple leagues that still have kickers, and I really enjoy those leagues. I think it's fun.
Kickers are predictable. They're not as predictable as other positions, but there is prediction advantage to them if you know what you're doing. But that does add an air of variability to it that can make things very painful when you lose to a team that has a guy who makes 6 field goals in a game. Like, doesn't usually happen.
Yeah. Not super often. Gabe Cayaniello asked Darnold and JJ and then said, hello, please answer. I'm not sure what this question is, but I assume it has something to do with Justin Jefferson and Sam Darnold. primarily, well, the takeaway or the way that I will interpret it is, what do you expect from Justin Jefferson with Sam Darnold at quarterback rest of season? Is he a top 2-3 wide receiver for you? Where does he fall in your rest of season rankings? I think there was some expectation that he might fall given the quarterback situation, but it hasn't happened yet.
He's my wide receiver 1, so everything's fine
Okay.
with Darnold. But I think the rule should be, Matt, that if we don't understand what the question's asking, then we don't try to answer it.
Very fair. Very fair. Deesh asks, trade Jameson Williams for Amari Cooper. That's an interesting one.
I've got them about the same. I got Jameson at 23, Cooper at 27, feeling better about the quarterback situation in Detroit, but Cooper is the wide receiver 1 versus, Jameson being the wide receiver 2. That's why they have fairly close value. Cleveland's strength of schedule is a little bit better, but I don't have a strong feeling on that one.
Yeah, I think that I would lean Amari Cooper just because the reliability feels a little bit better, although the way that Deshaun Watson plays quarterback, even that I don't know is true. They are very close. It feels like an upside versus a floor decision here, so maybe that's how you make the choice. I like to have balance on my team, so if you have a lot of upside elsewhere, it's nice to have an Amari Cooper-esque floor, and if you have a lot of floor everywhere else, it's nice to have a Jameson Williams-esque ceiling. That's just sometimes how I like to build my rosters. All right, we will end it there. Tons of questions we weren't able to get to, so feel free to hit me up on Twitter. I think you can hit John up on Twitter with some success. But appreciate you all being here and for the questions. We will be back next week. I will see you all for the waiver content early in the week. John will see you all for all his content throughout the week. Any closing thoughts, John?
Yeah, I do have a chat today at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern in our Discord. So if you are a subscriber, get into the Discord and I didn't answer your question, you can ask it there and I usually answer them all there, much to my chagrin sometimes. But yeah, we try to get to them all as we can. But if you want to stand out, a $1 or $2 super chat certainly helps.
Yep. All right. Thanks, everybody. Good luck in week 5. May your fantasy teams win. If you're playing against each other, I don't know what to tell you. Adios.